Did you hear the story about a woman named Terry Cheeks who was 33 years old when she was going through a divorce from her husband? Now, she had already had two daughters from a previous relationship and then had one son with her husband, but they weren't working out at all. In fact, the divorce was even contentious because he wouldn't allow it because he wanted to get the house and he felt like she was going to get it in a divorce, so he wasn't cooperating. In the meantime, she was steady working and she ended up meeting another guy who fell in love with her immediately and became her boyfriend. Well, one day, her daughter is 12 years old, and her daughter gets a phone call from her mother's boyfriend saying, "Hey, have you heard from your mother?" And then her daughter thought about it. It had been about 2 days since she heard from her mother. Like, what's going on? So she told the boyfriend, "Well, what's going on?" And he said, "If you hear from her, please tell her to call me. It's very important." And they hung up. Well, she thought about it and she was like, wait a minute. She called her grandma and said, "Grandma, have you heard from mommy?" And her grandma was like, "When was the last time you heard from your mother?" And she said 2 days ago. Her grandmother hung up, called her aunts, called the cavalry, and it turns out that since their mother had been gone for 2 days with 3 young kids, something was wrong with that, so they reported her missing. Once they reported her missing, they started making flyers, going out to canvass the neighborhoods, and then they got a call saying that they found their mother's car parked by some rocks. So they went to go look and identify the car, the grandmother, the 12-year-old daughter, her little sister. They're all looking for the mother, and they're scared because they're afraid, like, if they found her car, what happened to her? Next thing you know, before they even leave the site, their uncle who's there also, he comes to them and he's looking devastated. And they're like, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, they say they see a body over there. So now this is a crime scene and we need to go." And they start freaking out. But the grandmother's like, "No, that's not my daughter. My daughter is somewhere just hurt. She can't get to the phone to call us. Let's go home. Don't believe that. That's not my daughter out there. That's not her body." So they go home and they're just numb and they're just walking around sitting there waiting. And next thing you know, they get a phone call and they say, yes, they've identified the body. The body is your mother, Terry Cheeks. And they're so sad and they're so devastated and they don't know what could have happened to her, why she ended up on the side just left out on top of some rocks like a piece of trash. They don't understand what's going on. But of course, they question the stepfather, her mother's husband. And he said that, "Oh, I talked to her and I saw her. She said she was on the way to work and to meet her boyfriend. That's the last thing she told me." And they was like, okay. So they go and question her boyfriend and they end up arresting him and they end up taking him to trial. I'm talking about trial after trial, hung jury. And the third time they finally convicted him and he was sentenced to 20 years. While he's in jail for the murder of Terry Cheeks, the little girls are just growing up, just feeling sad, just growing up without a mother. The two girls end up moving in with their grandma, and the father who was battling for the house, he kept the house. That was his house. He kept their younger son with him. He's raising their child. Then all of a sudden, years later, the daughter, who was 12 at the time of the death, is a grown woman, gets a call and says, "We have some information for you. Would you like to meet?" And the police come up to her and they talk to her and they tell her, "We have some DNA evidence from your mother's body and it matches your cousin." And they said his name, like Laquan. And they're like, "What? How could that be possible? Like, why? They don't even really know each other like that. Why would his DNA be in my mother's fingernails?" And then it turns out there's a reason why. It turns out that the father was mad at the mother, not for having a boyfriend, but because of the house. And he was so adamant about losing that house that he went to find his younger cousin, their cousin, and he asked them to help him to off their mother so that he can make sure to keep the house. And the cousin agreed. Not only did the cousin agree, they pulled the stepfather's oldest son into the arrangement as well, and he agreed to help him. So that night when she was leaving her house to go to work, and the stepfather said that she was supposed to be going to meet her boyfriend, she wasn't going to meet her boyfriend. Before she even walked to get into the car, the the cousin Laquan grabbed her, and they both started strangling her while she was screaming and biting and fighting him, while the stepbrother looked on. His oldest son looked on and watched them. Once they strangled her and she was gone, they put him in her truck, and the stepbrother, the stepfather's oldest son, he got in the car and he drove her to another location. He was freaking out because he couldn't believe he had a dead body in his car. And after he got to the location, the cousin was there waiting for him too. So they both dragged the body out and threw the body on the rocks and just left it there. Then they got back into the cousin's car and went back home. At that same time, the stepfather had went to the store so he can be caught on camera and he can have an alibi saying he don't have nothing to do with it. And it turns out all of this time that they had plotted that plan to unalive and get rid of that mother, and that innocent man sat in jail for 20 years over that. They could never clear him until this DNA evidence came back. Of course, he got out of jail after 20 years, and he got awarded $11 million, for the time he spent in jail. And the stepfather and the cousin, they were arrested and sentenced to, the cousin was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and the stepfather was sentenced to the death penalty for what he did and how he conspired to kill that woman's mother, Terry Cheeks.